Well, hello everyone, and welcome to our webinar today. It's called Let It Go, Rethink Your Category Playbook. So welcome. This webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be made available to you and to everyone that's registered for this event. So let me start with some introductions. My name is Crawshaw. I'm the Services Director at CASME, and delighted to be here with Omer Abdullah. So CASME is a membership service supporting procurement. We've got 180 global organizations in our membership, and our objective is to run roundtables and virtual events to really support category managers in the work that they do on a global basis. And all the contributions that I will be making to today's webinar have come from that CASME membership. So delighted to be here today. And Omer, welcome to the webinar.
Thanks so much, Graham. I'm excited to be here today. My name is Omer Abdullah, folks. I'm a co-founder of the Smart Cube. We're a procurement intelligence and analytics organization. We've been around for about 16 or 17 years, and this year we formed our partnership with CASME, which we're very, very excited about, and looking forward to the conversation today.
Excellent, great, thank you, Omer. And please use the chat mechanism. So there's the chat that allows you to either make comments to anything that we say, or also ask questions. And at the end of the session, we'll be bringing in Sharon De Cruz, CASME's marketing director, to really guide us through some of the questions that you've been asking. So ask away, and between Omer and myself, we'll do our best to give you some answers where we can. Let's go straight into the content. So first of all, want to share with you what we of both organizations have seen in terms of a timeline for COVID-19, and specifically what category managers have been doing this year. Now, we all know that much earlier on in the year, we were all in that firefighting stage, that time of working out to make sure we had the right goods and services, getting products through borders, and really trying to address the needs of the business. And that time came to a conclusion towards the end of May. We then found that procurement organizations were going to a second phase, and that was a phase of reflection, recognizing that the panics were over, but coming to the realization that this virus is not going away and is fundamentally affecting not only business, but the work that procurement is doing. And so hence that reflection and working out what needs to be done. And now we've hit September, and it's time to rethink and rework any category strategies. So to go with the theme, let it go. As Elsa the Snow Queen would say, you've got to really rethink all that you've been doing in terms of category strategies and replan for the next sort of 12 to 18 months. And so September is a perfect time. And that's why we thought, well, we'd share with you our insights as to what we're seeing that many organizations are doing. So that's been the plan. So I'm going to hand to Omer's going to sort of describe some of the issues, and then we're going to take it from there. Omer.
Thanks, Graham, and let it go indeed. You know, it's interesting. It's been such a strange time these last 6 to, actually longer than that, depending on where you are in the world. But let's just say the last 6 to 9 months in terms of everything that's been going on and what's happened. But you know, it's also in a way, it's a very exciting time because you know, we really get the sense that procurement's time is now. It really is time for procurement. It's certainly been delivering in a very material way, and I want to touch on that on this slide in just a second. But it's just based on kind of what we've seen, what we've heard, the work that we've done in terms of conversations with CASME members, the work that we've done from a Smart Cube point of view. We're really seeing a lot of examples about the tangible impact that procurement has had. Now, clearly, if you look at the slide on the left-hand side, there's been a host of issues that we've all had to grapple with in one form or another. There has been business disruption. There has been issues around supply chain reliability. There have been demand imbalances, inventory shortages, delivery issues, certainly, depending on where you're sourcing from, that's materially there. And of course, one of the big ticket hot button buzzwords of the day, and that is heightened supplier risk. And all of that relates ultimately to cash flow and cash flow needs, and particularly as they hit back in March, April, May timeframe, but certainly continuing to this day. But given that context, given all of what's gone on, procurement's response across the board, I think, has been nothing short of remarkable. Procurement organizations, as we've seen them, have looked to utilize different tools at their disposal, tools that they've had, tools that they've accessed, given the more sophisticated ecosystem, supply ecosystem that we have, digital or otherwise out there. Not only accessing the tools that are out there, but the talent, the folks who are working in procurement have really, in many ways, stepped up and responded in a fashion that is very agile, that is very much focused on the need of the hour, the issue of the day that they have to grapple with, and really responded. And in doing so, rethought processes. They've not been beholden to this is how things have been done, this is how we need to do things, but rather they've really focused hard on what do we need to do to make an impact? What do we need to do to help, in some cases, ensure the corporation's survival? But also in many cases ensure continuity, both from a supply chain perspective, but as important, I mean, ultimately more important, is customer continuity, ultimately. And so we've seen this sort of, if you look at the right-hand side, this managed state emerge, where we have far more agile, far more resilient supply chains. We have improved supplier relationships. Now, we're going to touch on all these themes as we go forward, but certainly a lot in terms of improved relationships. We've seen much better managed risk. We've seen an adjustment to economic realities, cash conservation, focus on stability, and this emphasis on customer of choice. And I want to say one thing. I want to share a couple of data points. I'll give CASME a plug, since I know Graham's not going to do it. But CASME did a fantastic piece of research a couple of months ago, and you can find it if you're on the CASME platform. You'll find it there. If you're on Amplify Pro, which is the SmartCubes platform, you'll find it in our CASME center within that. But it's called the COVID-19 Procurement Response Strategy, Europe and America's Benchmarking. And I want to share with you just a couple of quick facts, and then Graham, I'll let you kind of add to this. That research found that 63% of procurement practitioners were fully engaged, providing strategic input and contribution to their organizations as a whole, not just within, obviously, procurement, but as a whole. And another 30% were indirectly engaged. That's 93% of practitioners being materially involved in where the company is going. And that's a huge jump compared to 2008, when involvement at that time was minimal by comparison. And I think the numbers I saw were in the single-digit percentages. Now, there's many reasons for that, but certainly 89% of companies said procurement was far more mature, far more credible, and far better equipped within itself and as part of the ecosystem to add strategic value than compared to that 2008 financial crisis. So I wanted to share that data point because it sort of brings to life everything that we're talking about the impact that procurement has had and the value that procurement has delivered. And there's a specific set of implications that comes out of that, which we'll talk about as we go through. But Graham, any comments or thoughts you'd add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I would like to just add on the cash element of the managed state, because I think cash and linked with payment terms has been one of those sort of topics that's been very much under discussion. And just to share with you that we did some benchmarking in July and found out that 80% of companies haven't formally changed any of their payment terms to their suppliers. However, looking on it on a case-by-case basis, recognizing actually some suppliers have needed help, they've needed support. So whether it is a small business, whether it is a diverse business, or just one identified as critical or vulnerable, then help is being made available. But equally, I want to say that procurement has not been benevolent. It's not been really just going to support the supplier. There's been a trade-off required. So whether it is introducing supply chain discounting or whether it's offering invoice discounting, and for the record, 2% net 30 seems to be a good sort of solid trade that we've got experience that people have been offering to their suppliers. So helping out, and in fact, the statement that we make here again is that suppliers will remember how well procurement has treated them. And I think this goes along all that managed state. You've got to look after your suppliers, and there are different ways to do that. Listening is probably one of them. So yeah, interesting. I've got some other points, but we'll come back to those on another chart.
Fantastic. Yeah, and that customer of choice point is so critical. It's so critical. And this is the time when we really discovered where we really are customers of choice, or rather maybe the better term is partners of choice on both ends of the spectrum, both customers and suppliers. So with that backdrop, what we're going to talk about today in the next, let's say 20 to 30 minutes that we have, is we're going to walk through a framework to talk through specifically how to react, how to rethink the category playbooks and category strategies that we have as practitioners. And now it's tempting, if you look at this, it's a 5-dial framework that we put up here. It's tempting to think that we start right at point 4, but there's an amount of grounding. There's a level of homework that has to get done. And it's important to do this, and I'll tell you why. I think, as we've talked about, everything that procurement has delivered, all the value that procurement has realized, has resulted in a heightened sense, heightened level of C-suite awareness. There's a higher level of credibility that procurement has today than it had before. There is a receptivity across the C-suite, if you will, and with CFOs who many CPOs report to, that procurement has done an amazing job, and in many cases it's really helped save the organization. And so to use a Las Vegas gambling analogy, procurement has earned a bunch of chips, and it's time to cash it in. So if we're going to cash it in right, then we have to be thoughtful and strategic in that process, and hence the 5-step framework. Now we'll go through each one of these in detail, but just very quickly, step 1 is assessing the demand context. To be clear, this is the overall company demand, not category demand. We will get to that, but we're talking about overall macro company demand. Procurement has to optimize the supply chain. Now, of course, within the remit that we operate within. Now, there are many CPOs who are also chief supply chain officers, and you have a wider remit. But for those, but there are many aspects that CPOs and heads of procurement and their teams can focus on within the remit that they've got in the categories that they focus on to optimize the supply chain. And we'll talk about that. The third step is fortifying the operating model, which is how you change yourself, right? Organization, tools, structures, processes. Fourth, we get to rethinking category strategies themselves, and what do we do and how do we think about that? And then number 5, improving supplier management, right? How do we, as Graham talked about, continue to be customer of choice? How do we continue to build these partnerships with our suppliers as we go forward? So those are the 5 overall steps, and we'll dive one by one through each one of those.
Okay, let's go straight into the first one then. If I move that over. So
all right.
Assess the demand context.
Absolutely. So that demand context, again, now here we're talking about, again, to reiterate the point, it's about overall company demand. What's happening to overall company demand? And this is an important point. Now, I know as procurement practitioners, we always think about company demand and where things are going, but this is another level of analysis that I think needs to get done. And again, the reason we talk about this is, not to put it the wrong way, but sometimes we tend to get parochial. We're very focused on what we're doing and what our issues are. And that's fair in many contexts because there's a lot that we've got to get done. But given if I go back to the chips that I referred to, there's a real opportunity right now, a heightened awareness, credibility that procurement has with the C-suite to really make an impact. And in order to do that, we have to speak the language of the business, right? We can't just rely on our business partners and our stakeholders to tell us what's going on. We need to understand that ourselves and interpret and make those assessments so we can have better conversations with the business. So 4 sets of questions. Number 1, what is the near to medium term outlook for my sector and my company? What does the industry structure look like? Who's survived? And that's not just suppliers, it's our customers. How have they changed? How have they morphed? What are their new expectations that they're going to expect in terms of, let's say, payment terms, or in terms of delivery schedules, or access points, whatever it might be? How have our competition morphed? How have they changed as a result of everything that's gone on? And of course, how's our supply base changed as well? So what's the outlook for the sector and the company? Let's look at demand. How volatile or stable is demand? How are we able to better predict demand with more accuracy going forward? You know, by now we've probably all heard about U-shaped and V-shaped and L-shaped recoveries, and there's a shortage of conversation around that. Whatever it is, and you know, there's a change to be expected, and maybe the change was a boost in the near term. Food and beverage companies saw a massive uptick as through the crisis, whereas other, let's say, luxury players saw an impact or a drop. But what's that recovery going to look like? How's demand going to change? What's the timing and pace of it? Question number 3: what are the key levers and drivers of demand? What's driving demand? Which segments, which markets are going to drive demand? And of course, ultimately, that has implications in terms of your products and services and the categories that you're going after. But what's happening in terms of overall demand? And then last but not least, how will customer or consumer behavior change depending if you're B2B versus B2C? Is it short-term? Is it long-lasting? What's the level of receptivity that they're going to have? And is there going to be a near-term surge or drop? And are we expecting that to continue? Is it a structural change versus a shorter-term change? And there's a set of action areas that you can take as part of that. You need to develop a point of view on the sector outlook. You need to have more company-specific demand analysis. You have to understand what levers to monitor, as we talked about. Understand the ultimate implications on supply chain. We'll get into that more in a second. And of course, what are the future resource requirements? So just back to Graham's point around becoming better customers and better partners with our suppliers, we have to think about that from our end customer as well. It's a two-way, it's a multi-way street, I suppose, is the way to sort of think about it. So assessing demand context is the first critical aspect to really think through.
And I would say key to that, Omer, is really the relationship with stakeholders to really understand what the business is needing. And that's been a challenge, and has been a challenge for procurement for some time. But I'm hoping and seeing evidence that from the way companies are responding to the current situation, that actually credibility with stakeholders is being built. And so it's just easier to get this information and be trusted with the information and the business objectives to really understand that. Procurement's got to make sure it listens. I think that's a good point. It's not a procurement telling the business. The procurement teams have got to be practicing their listening skills and really understanding what the business needs are, and then interpret them and work with the suppliers, which ties nicely to optimize the supply chain.
Yep. And so in optimizing supply chain, again, you know, if we thought about overall demand, there's going to be implications from a supply chain point of view. This is where, as Graham talked about, we have to have good relationships with our stakeholders. And our stakeholders are across the board. There are internal customers. There are folks that we work with across the supply chain. And within our remit, there's a bunch of things that we can answer. There's a set of questions that we should be looking to better understand and engage in that debate and dialogue with our internal stakeholders as well. So 5 broad questions. What are the post-crisis implications for my short and long-term strategy? And what's the extent of that disruption that we expect? How sustained is it going to be? Again, is it short-term? Is it going to be structural? Do we have to fundamentally rethink what's going on from a supply chain point of view? And that, of course, cascades, right? You think about the overall demand, you think about the implications on products and services, that has implications on the supply chain, that has implications on us as procurement practitioners in terms of what we do. The second question is around improving visibility across my value chain, including tier 2 and 3 suppliers. This is nothing new. We've been talking about this for how many years? If you think back to the late 2000s, I think it was, when we had the lead issue with Mattel and the toys and the recall that was going on. And that's entirely down to issues around tier 2, tier 3 suppliers having quality issues that ultimately bubbled up. So having that visibility across multiple tiers, again, assessing what the implications are in terms of the near term and the long term, fundamental aspects, but it's still important aspects to consider. Number 3, what are the alternative models that will be competitive and operationally resilient going forward? I'm in North America, I'm in the US. There's a lot of talk about China, right? And what the implication is going to be with China and, you know, our dependence, and I refer to US first in that respect, in terms of what's the US's dependence on China specifically. And of course, there's a lot of political ramifications into that, which we don't need to go down here. But certainly there are questions to ask, right? There will be real implications, particularly post November 3rd, in terms of what that might mean or might not mean for us as practitioners here. And of course, it's not just the US. There are issues that, that folks in Europe are grappling with, certainly with Brexit happening and all of these other aspects in terms of what's going to be resilient and what's going to make sense. So what's our dependence? Where do we want to be dependent? How do we want to change things? How are we working with contract manufacturers, for example, et cetera?
And actually, I would say it's only this last 10 days that the Brexit conversations have really come to a head. There are challenges. There's not agreement. There's the threat of being against international treaties, international law. So I think it's almost a wake-up call to say, actually, have you got your act together in terms of ensuring that supply chains will work come 1st of January 2021. So as if we haven't got enough problems with the virus, now we've got Brexit to deal with. But anyways.
Right, exactly. And that's the thing, you know, there is, where there is uncertainty, there is work for us to do as procurement folks. I mean, that's just the reality of the situation. And I think we tend to get comfortable with the status quo. And this is not just procurement folks, it's everybody. This is human nature. But events like these sort of bring out to the fore that we need to be constantly thinking about these issues and how we're sort of reacting to it. So in line with that, in terms of reacting to uncertainty, how do I embed agility into my supply chain? You know, speed, responsiveness. What does that mean from a process, from a tools perspective? What does that mean from a data visibility perspective? You know, you really have to have much better information and visibility and understanding of data to be able to sort of respond to that. And then of course, the implication there is talent as well, right? What does that mean for our people and what kind of folks do we need? And I'm gonna touch more on that as we go to the next piece. But the fifth question here is around how do I drive logistics optimization, just in the supply chain vein. So host of action areas, I won't go through all of them in detail, but you know, understand the post-COVID-19 supply chain landscape and how that's evolved. Measure, forecast, understand supply chain risk. So particularly as global organizations, you know, geopolitical, social, environmental, cultural issues to grapple with and how that translates down. Model what alternative supply chain models will look like through sourcing through the network spectrum. There's issues around supplier base in terms of consolidating supplier base, localizing your supplier base, different answers for different folks. Look at future contract manufacturing options and considerations. And of course, optimize your logistics model, both for now and then where you think it's going to go in the longer term. So some fundamental sets of action areas and issues to consider.
And just picking up on the consolidation of supplier base, that again is one of these actions that goes in a complete cycle. Sometimes procurement is really keen on consolidation, other times it's expanding to encourage innovation. But I think the message I've been hearing this time is that you can't probably manage all the suppliers in terms of risk and some of the other challenges the virus has given if you've got so many. And so examples being in marketing agencies, rather than trying to manage 25, go down and really get your stakeholders to agree that actually 9 or 10 is a much more of a manageable number. So a great opportunity again for procurement to add value without sort of being focused purely on the cost side of things.
So with that, that brings us to step number 3 in the 100-day framework. And that is actually one that I think is closest to all of our hearts, right? Which is fortifying our operating model. And really thinking about what the future holds for us in terms of our structure, in terms of our processes, in terms of our tools, and most importantly, in terms of our people. And again, you know, I've said this probably at least 4 times in the course of this conversation, and Graham's probably tired because I've said it X times that before, but you know, our time is now. This is the point at which we can really make an impact and make a change. And so 4 broad sets of questions. What defines success for my organization in the post-COVID-19 world? What's the nature of the role? How are we going to be as business partners within our organization? What's the role that we want to play? And how integrated into the strategic process do we want to be as we work through, particularly in light of the heightened awareness and credibility and all those aspects that we've talked about? And that has real implications for talent and our people and what they should and should not be doing and spending their time on and focused on, and how they deliver value. Related aspect, how do I redefine my organization for agility and business continuity? How do we embed more flexibility into the process? How do we, one of the interesting things about where we are is nobody knows where we're going, right? Nobody can tell any of us. We have no models to look at. This is not just a simple financial crisis or anything else. It is fundamentally unique in terms of all of these things that are happening at this point in time. So we have to think there are no absolutes. We're posing questions because there are no answers specifically to say, go do X, go do Y, go do Z. It is understanding your context and the scenarios that you're grappling with, and then understanding. So that scenario-based approach, that modeling-based approach is an important one, because we don't know what all the outcomes are going to be. We need to understand what the alternative scenarios are going to be and be ready to be able to react as best as we can to those. So understanding how our organization will change is critical. The third one is something we've been talking about for a while, which is how do I progress my digital agenda? But it's come to the fore. Those organizations that have been relatively more progressed along their digital agenda are able to react much more quickly. They have better data, they have better information, they can get information across and insight and messages and decisions across far more quickly. They can progress much more quickly. Now, the beauty of this particular piece is this does not mean that you need to break the bank and go make a crazy investment and really go all out from an end-to-end point of view. It may mean part of that depending on where you are in your progression and development. But frankly, there's an incredible ecosystem that's out there that you can begin to I was going to say digitize, but the correct term is digitalize your agenda as you go forward. So there's a lot of options. Understand the current state, understand where the gaps are, and then build a roadmap for sure. But then start taking steps. Don't bet on kind of an all or nothing scenario for the future. And then last but not least, how do I implement the right risk program to proactively manage my suppliers? How can we be comprehensive reasonably in our risk coverage and at the same time be flexible in how we think about it? How can we be proactive and stay ahead of the curve, understanding that we have to be reactive as well? No one can, black swan events are black swan events because they're black swan events. Nobody knows that they're going to happen, and they will happen. We're going to have something else that comes down the pike. We just don't know what it is. So let's try and be as proactive as possible, but that risk program needs to also be structured and efficient in terms of how it reacts as well in that process. So action areas to consider, look at your operational best practices and assess what's going on and how you can improve. Embed better category dashboards, right? Understand the metrics and have vigilance around, for the critical categories, what's going on there. Of course, you need to look at analytics around spend, et cetera. Make versus buy, again, a theme that's flowing from the supply chain side. Implement an effective risk management and mitigation program. There's many steps to think about and ways to go about that. But again, the time is now for that. Segment suppliers for appropriate risk treatment. And again, of course, the digital agenda. I'll throw one anecdote. I was having a conversation with the CPO of a global pharma company just a few days ago, and he was talking about that. They have a focus right now in terms of driving risk programs and implementing it. That they have the ear of the CFO, and this is an organization that was actually already pretty progressive, but they have the ear of the CFO to really make some fundamental changes. So again, not to belabor the point, but I'll say it again, time is now. This is really the point at which to think about these things and better understand that. Graham, thoughts, comments?
Yeah, I mean, the time is now, or the other phrase is you don't want to let a good crisis go to waste. Yeah. You're right, you've got this window of opportunity to get things done. When we've done some benchmarking in terms of risk, there's frustration though in terms of the tools to really support. There's frustration with the ERP systems. And so our findings are that either companies have got a bespoke system they've developed, or still tremendous reliance on the good old spreadsheet. So I think I'm really hoping that suppliers of these systems will recognize that it's got to be plugged. We've got to have those tools to really support. But you've also got to keep quite level-headed, because there are so many risks. you can't cover everything. There's a big drive, whether it's anti-competitive practices, whether it's the whole child labour, some of the modern day slavery issues. You've really got to work out what is important, what's critical. I think the message is use this time to really get a handle on that, convince the stakeholders, get your investment from the CFO, and it will put you in much stronger position going forward. Let's look about rethinking our category strategies then.
And now we get to the title of the presentation.
Let it go.
Let it go, indeed. And look, I hope it's clear why rethinking category strategies comes now, because there is a need to understand demand. There is a need to think about the supply chain. There is a need to look at our organization and then be able to use all of that analysis, all of that insight, all of that learning to really rethink where our category strategy should be going. And 5 broad sets of questions to talk about there. Which categories have been the most impacted, right? And these are not only the big spend categories, and I think that goes without saying, I'm sure, but also enabling, bottleneck categories, the ones that we have to really pay attention to. And in this context that we're in today, also geographic focused categories, those become critical categories as well. Ones that maybe, I don't know, a year ago, you might not have put on the radar necessarily. Now you need to think about because it impacts supply chain continuity, it impacts performance, et cetera. So what are those categories? You have to pick the most critical ones. How has the demand profile and supply market characteristics changed for those categories? And this is everything from overall demand, which we talked about earlier, down to the category level. What's the structure of the supply market there? What's changed? Who survived? Who hasn't survived? What's our play as a buyer within those specific categories? We have to be able to understand that at a more granular level. The third aspect is what strategic changes need to be made to assure future supply continuity by category. Do we need to change suppliers? Do we need to look at where we're going to source from? What are the resultant cost implications? There will be trade-offs that we have to make as part of that process. And in line with that, what are the top category sourcing levers that deliver value for 2021? Do we need to rethink how we go to market? Do we need to focus less on, do we need to run sourcing events, for example? Or do we need to rethink how we're engaging with our suppliers? Do we need to rationalize SKUs as an example? Or do we need to rethink demand management as being the primary lever because we don't have leverage with the supply base? You know, another conversation that I had recently was around single source and what do we do with those? And, you know, this environment has really brought to the fore issues around single source dependence, right? And we understand there are some situations where you don't have a choice. It's a highly involved category. There's a huge switching cost to moving from a particular supplier to another one. But this is the time to begin thinking about what to do. What's our roadmap? How do we want to make near-term changes? Or are we going to simply accept where we are? And in some situations, we have to do that. We don't have a choice. But where can we begin to embed flexibility in the medium to longer term to really drive things forward? So what are the top levers? And then last but not least, what are the expected contractual changes that we need to put in place? What's the nature of the deals that we need to put in place to manage risk? Are we going to lock in more, or are we going to embed greater flexibility? To Graham's point earlier, if we consolidate 25 down to 5 or 6 or 10 suppliers, what does that mean from a risk perspective? And you know, sometimes the answer is going to be, yeah, that's what we have to do. But maybe we restructure contracts within that universe that we now work with to change the way we operate and embed more flexibility. Or in other aspects, you know, particularly where we've learned a lot more about these suppliers, and over the last 6 months, you know, this again going back to better relationships and customer of choice, where we really understood that this is a supplier that we can rely on, we double down and we really build a deeper partnership. But of course, embed aspects of flexibility there as well. So again, action areas should fall out of this pretty clearly. Look at your category spend assessment, how that's changed. Understand changes in the supply market and the demand levers. Certainly redevelop your category playbooks, because whatever you've done in January 1st this year, or even February 1st this year, has changed, and the universe has changed that we have to be able to react to. Certainly look at commodity risk and embed mitigation measures there. look at alternative supply market suppliers, and look at opportunities for accelerated category sourcing. What are those areas where you can accelerate and really look for opportunities in multiple fashions? I don't just mean in terms of unit cost reduction, but really think hard about how things will change, how you can accelerate and capture more total value in some of those relationships.
So let me give some very specific examples. So last week we had a panel conversation with 100 business travel category managers, and really interesting. If ever there was a category in the Smart Cubes analysis, it's high disruption and high risk. So it's right in that top right hand corner, and the message was clear. You've got demand issues. You've got 35% of companies just completely banning travel, full stop. Some allowing sort of domestic or intercontinental Europe travel if it is necessary for running the business, and that's not attending conferences or events. And certainly everyone was saying internal meetings, travel is just completely banned. So what people have been doing is using the opportunity to revisit the policy. And so we've seen that 68% of companies said that the authority level has been increased to before anyone can get approval for travel. And I think then the other message was, you just don't know what 2021 is going to look like. So given that procurement needs information before going to the market, it's even more important. So hold off on your hotel RFPs. Don't rush to do it. Wait until you've got a bit more information. So perhaps leave it rather than September, which is a traditional time of the year to go out to market. Hold off back until December, and certainly look at different ways of doing things. I think finally with the airlines, we all know they're hurting. And so there's an opportunity there to actually work together. And you may not know what you want, you may not know how it's going to look like, but definitely communication is sort of key on that one. And that really leads nicely on to number 5, which is all about improving supplier management and working actually with the suppliers very closely.
Yeah, absolutely. And so as we look at suppliers, I mean, this is where we're at the most granular level in terms of how we think about the path forward and how we recover in 5 sets of questions here. How do I de-risk my supplier strategy? What's the, again, what is the supplier market structure? How's the landscape fundamentally changed? And what does de-risk really mean, right? Does it mean reducing the number of suppliers? Could be part of that. It could mean rethinking how we manage inventory. It could be down to scheduling. It could be down to supply choices and where we source from. But all of these factors need to get considered in that de-risking process.
And actually, Omer, don't forget, of course, your suppliers are doing this.
Absolutely.
Because they're trying to protect their business. And I've seen examples, especially in the world of facilities management, where actually the suppliers are choosing who they want to do their projects with. So this de-risking you can't do in isolation. You've got to really get into the thought process of the critical suppliers. So it's a two-way process, something that it's often, you can get so caught up in your own world that you miss.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, that's such an important point. You don't become the customer of choice overnight. And you don't become the customer of choice because you're willing to pay a little bit more to get your product. There's many aspects, and you know, we've alluded to it before, but the last 6 months has really shown where you know, we've been making investments in sort of relationship credits with our suppliers and where we haven't. And you know, those who've been making those relationship credits, even when they're in difficult situations, they work together. It's open book. They understand what's going on. They get things done together. But absolutely 100%, suppliers are doing the exact same thing. Who do we want to work with when let's just say when things hit the fan the next time around? Who do I want in my ecosystem, in my camp, that I'm going to partner with in that process? So 100%, Graham, that absolutely is spot on. So second question around that: how do I reduce my dependence on specific countries, regions, suppliers? Again, we're back to that China issue that we talked about in the US. But of course, many things to think about, right? You have to pre-qualify, you have to consider switching costs, but certainly questions to answer. What are the total cost of ownership implications, right? What are the cost elements that we expect to change? who are these optimal suppliers going to be, right? Consider total cost of ownership factors, consider nearshore, consider offshore, consider how the level of agility you're going to be able to get, the level of real, I guess I'll use the broad term partnership, but meaning how closely will they integrate with your operations and really embed into your business, as you go forward and ensure continuity of what you do. And then how can I best monitor supplier health as I ramp back up to this business as usual? And supplier health, of course, is not just financial. It's not just looking at their credit reports and solvency related aspects, but there's other operational, environmental, business aspects to consider as well. The bigger the organization, the more the factors that everybody I think has to consider multiple factors, but the bigger the organization, the more emphasis there are on things like ESG and other aspects like that as well. And then action areas, again, fall out pretty straightforward. Assess the post-COVID-19 supplier landscape. What does that look like? Look at country-specific risk assessments and see what you can do there. Develop cost scenarios. Again, going back to the point I made a couple of slides ago around modeling the future, right? Scenario-based approaches. We don't know. We don't have the answers. We think it could go this way, it could go this way, it could go that way. But we have to model and account for all of those different approaches, at least at some level. We have to identify pre-qualify alternative suppliers and get that process going, build our roadmap, look at pre-negotiated purchasing conditions, payment terms. I know Graham's touched on some of that and can add to that. Look at supplier health on an ongoing basis, not just one-off. And then help your critical and vulnerable suppliers. Again, customer of choice means we look after our ecosystem. It means you don't drop your suppliers the first moment you get. And a lot of folks we've seen that practice beautifully in the last 6 months. And there are suppliers out there that are in difficult shape for no fault of their own, and vice versa, customers as well. And I think it's incumbent on both parties to work together to make sure that we sort of get over this chasm collectively.
So Omer, we may have our theme of let it go, but one thing that you can't let go of is procurement can do all of these. You've given loads of questions here. We've got lots to think about, but cost saving targets still need to be met. So we've done some benchmarking, confirmed those can't be let go. You've got to be still focusing on those and recognizing that the savings may come from different areas than when anticipated in the early planning at the start of this year. And commodity prices, recognizing that you've got to make sure that any clauses that you've got where contracts change according to commodities, they need to be kept up to date. Savings may come from areas that were sort of not originally planned for, but hate to disappoint, but you've got to do all of this that we've been talking about and still get your cost savings targets. But I think procurement's in a good shape to do that. Let's give them some key takeaways. Omer.
Absolutely. So look, to wrap up, we've talked through this 5-step framework to think about. The idea is, at the end of the day, we need to be much more strategic and thoughtful as we go forward, right? Or rather continue being that way. Procurement has clearly played a key role throughout the pandemic. And again, to reiterate that analogy, it's time to cash in. It's time to make something of it and position ourselves for the future. So now is the time to be far more strategic, and we have a window of opportunity to really make that change. And again, focus on strategy for the business, focus on success, and really become that customer of choice. So we have this window. It's an exciting time to be in procurement, really, because of just the awareness, the sensitivity, the credibility that we've earned. And now's the time to frankly capitalize on that and go. And with that, Graham, I'll give you the last word here before we go to Q&A.
I'm going to pick up on the credibility, because having been in procurement for many years, it is really encouraging to see how businesses are responding and recognizing that procurement has done such a great job. I mean, we couldn't really ask for better. Let's not lose this opportunity, but we've got to grab it and make the most of it. So I know we've used loads of phrases, but yeah, the window of opportunity there, time is now to really, if you need to put a business case together to your CFO to justify some new tools, to justify some even new people that have perhaps got the skill set to really help you move forward, then do it now. Don't waste that opportunity.
Yeah.
We're out of time. In fact, I think you and we could keep going all day, but I think maybe others may not like listening to that. Thank you so much for the insights. It's been great having this hour-long chat with you, giving some thoughts to procurement, and great to have the support from the Smart Cube or your market intelligence. Put that together with the peer-to-peer information that comes from CASME, and we've got a fantastic alliance there. And so encourage everyone to go on to Amplify Pro, go on to the resource center at CASME. For now, it's time to say goodbye. So Omer, thank you so much. And also thanks to Andrew and Sharon for supporting us today. So from me, Graham Crawshaw, and from Omer Abdullah, thank you all very much and look forward to our next webinar. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you.